I put this thing up, are your motives pure? Because there was a very interesting study of alcoholics. It was a prayer study. And what they did was divided a group of alcoholics in two, and half of them prayed for by their nearest and dearest. And the researchers were astonished to find that the people receiving prayer did worse than the others. Now, they were fascinated by this, and they interpreted this to mean that the people sending intention had mixed motives. They could have been people who were sending intention for increased survival and for them to stop drinking, but not really mean it. You know, alcoholics are tough to live with. They could have been sending intention, an unconscious intention, for that person to die and to free them. Or they could be a codependent. They could be somebody who was also a drinker and didn't want to lose his or her drinking buddy. So when you're sending intention, it's important to think about what it is you're really sending. You know, we all pretend to send happy thoughts, including to people who we don't like very much. But we have to try to get to that place of real sense of compassion and real understanding of what it is we're sending. I just want to look at this whole idea, too, of psychic bubble. A lot of people think of protection as just that, a wall. You know, I want to create a psychic bubble around myself so that all the awful people at work who are constantly glaring at me or sniping at me or whatever can't get to me. I want you to think about this in terms of what we've talked about all weekend. If we are all one, if we are trying to establish connection, the last thing you want to do is create a psychic bubble, a barrier to that. Besides which, I'm not clear that it works. There have been 2 studies of this by William Broad, the guy whose name I couldn't remember yesterday, the psychologist. I had a senior moment, I guess. William Broad did a lot of work on seeing if you could psychically shield yourself from intention. So he would have 2 groups, one sending intention to the other. And oftentimes when they do these kinds of studies, they register the effect by measuring the autonomic nervous system of the recipient. And they find when somebody sends an intention, even if they stare at the other person without the person knowing it, the recipient will receive a change in his autonomic nervous system, almost like a shock. So we're constantly picking up all the time. It's been demonstrated. So he wanted to see if the recipients could think of a barrier to this. And so he had them think of whatever barrier worked for them, a moat, a brick wall, anything like that. And he found, in one case, it worked. The people thinking of a wall, etc., would stop that kind of effect on the autonomic nervous system. They would, in a sense, protect themselves. They tried to replicate it, and they found it didn't work. So I think from there's no good evidence to show that works, and it also doesn't make sense. If you're trying to open yourself up to intention, I think there's a better way. I think instead of protection, you want surrender. And let me suggest this in certain ways. I think you look at protecting yourself from the perspective of relationship. There are 2 ways to see this. One is the idea that it's not a single bad thing coming to you, but it's the relationship. You know, Clinton's comment, it's the economy stupid. It's almost like we need to say, it's the relationship stupid to ourselves. And of course, not really calling ourselves stupid, because that would be a negative intention. But just constantly thinking of it ourselves in relationship. If you're having a bad time with someone else, it's your relationship that's the problem, not them being bad guys. So one of the first and simplest ways of doing something with them is to send them a positive intention. You know, I love this book, The Gentle Art of Blessing, because the guy in this, the author, had a terrible situation. He was pushed out of his own company. And for years, he just resented the people who had done this to him. He thought they'd taken away everything. And then he realized that the person who was really harmed by this was himself. So he stopped doing that. He started sending blessing to these people who had harmed them. He blessed everything about them. May they flourish and multiply. He blessed their children. He wanted them to have great riches. He sent blessing, blessing, blessing. And suddenly, he found his life was turning around. It wasn't just they who were the recipients of good intention. He was the recipient of good intention. He was getting all the benefit, and their relationship changed. So I throw this out as a suggestion. I know there are occasions where some people are just so on a different plane than you are that you can't come together. But before you try that, before you conclude that, just try some positive intention to them. Just send out intention to your worst nightmare and see what happens to it. Send intention to the person who is just making your life a misery and see if that doesn't change the relationship. I think any kind of positive intention can heal any kind of situation. And I think we found from just our little story of the runaway that it doesn't have to be a bodily problem. It can also be a psychic problem. So try that and just see. But it's about really getting to that place of compassion for that person, really walking a mile in their shoes and really seeing where they're coming from. And that gets you in that place of compassion. Even if you have to imagine things, imagine why they're so angry at you. Imagine why it is they're making your life a living hell. What is it from their perspective? And if you can see it from their perspective, you might be able to send out a pure intention.